Welcome to Plead the Cause, brought to you by Heart of the Bride Ministries, where we plead the cause of the orphaned and vulnerable children around the world. I'm Tommy, the Director of Community Engagement for Heart of the Bride Ministries, and with me in the studio once again is Brian Chrisman, the Executive Director of Heart of the Bride Ministries. What's up, Brian?
Oh man, doing good today, Tommy. How about you, man?
Doing very well. Doing very well.
Survived all those storms last night.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It was
Yeah.
crazy around here, man.
Yeah. I mean,
And
I
it's
think I slept. I think I slept through it all. So,
oh yeah, I'm a pretty hard sleeper too. Once I finally went to sleep, I had no idea what was going on till my kids wake me up.
yeah. Right.
They're like,
Yeah.
okay, I guess it is
Once the
storming.
thunder's loud enough, right?
So I got to be honest with you. Sometimes then I check my phone and I see tornado warning, tornado warning. I'm like, oh, I probably should have known about that. Oh well.
Yes, I tend to sleep through the alerts as well. So you're
Yeah,
not
I
alone,
have them
man. You're
set
not alone.
up. It's alerting. I just don't know.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
oh man.
Oh
Well,
man.
so today's a little bit of a different episode, Tommy. I
Yeah.
get to interview you a little bit, man. How do you feel about that? Are you psyched? Are you ready to go?
I mean, I've done one of these before and it felt weird for me because I tend to be the one asking the questions and kind of driving the conversation, and it tends to be a little different for me when I'm on the other side and I'm being asked the questions. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Well,
different.
so today we're going to go back and hit some of the foundational things for Heart of the Bride in our ministry and what drives us. Our last episode was on giving, but it was on a foundational passage for Heart of the Bride, being founded on a number of things, but one of those a conviction for biblical giving that is sacrificial, joyful, and voluntary. But behind all that was that measure of faith, you know that that God has promised when we are obedient to Him to take care of us. And so we hinted that this episode would be kind of an extension of that, and it is. Now it's not. We're not talking about financial giving. That may come in at some point, just the faith in finances. But what we want to get to is this foundation of faith, of stepping in faith, of moving in faith. And I know faith has a number of definitions. Not talking about the faith, right? Although that undergirds everything. Our belief in God, who He is, Jesus Christ, sacrifice on the cross for us, right? The gospel and all of that, and the faith contained in the Word of God, but the idea of actually moving in faith in the sense of trust, right? That when God speaks, when God calls, when we respond to Him, that we trust in Him to take care of us, to work through us, to provide what we need to do what He's calling us to do. That kind of faith is what we're talking about today. Another one of the foundations of Heart of the Bride in the beginning of our ministry, and especially in the lives of our founders, was the Experiencing God Bible study, which we are going through again right now as a staff, and so it's reminding us of a lot of the principles, biblical principles of how we operate and how we should continue to operate and how we need to grow. Being going through a study like that again lets you see some markers of, praise God, He's grown me in these areas, and then some areas of challenge to go, oh man, I need to grow in these. And sometimes you go, oh, I forgot about that. God challenged me and I did not keep it before me. So we're going to talk about that today. Everybody at Heart of the Bride has a story of stepping out in faith, of God, calling and them responding. And so we're kind of going to talk about this. And I've talked about this in other contexts, and maybe one day I'll kind of do this one more specifically. But how do you step into a missionary role like this, right? Um, you know, I I I remember in early years of my faith journey and in my life, looking at missionaries and just going, man, I don't know how I could ever do that. And so now I sit here doing what I do. And sometimes I go, oh yeah, I'm a missionary, right? Like it seems almost ordinary now. So how do you get to that? Tommy, how have you viewed that in the past, man? Being when you were a young believer, or now you haven't gotten to share your testimony. One day we need to do one of these where you just kind of share your testimony. And I know, as far as you actually having surrendered to the Lord and actually understanding and giving your life, that's actually more recent than people would think. But you grew up in a Christian family. You grew up exposed to the
Yeah.
things of the Lord. I mean, did you have that view of missionaries like, man, wow, mission, like they give their life, they, I can't believe they go to foreign countries, right? I can't believe they go to Africa, you know, and how would one ever do that? I mean, did you have those kind of thoughts like, oh,
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think everybody goes through a phase where they associate the term missionary with going and living in the most remote, or impoverished place in another country you can think of, right? I think that's a very common correlation.
yeah, you
So,
watched Into
yeah,
the
definitely.
Spear or read End of the Spear, and you're like, man, the Elliots, I can't, that's a missionary. I can't do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and of course, part of that gets to what is a missionary, and if we look at the Merriam-Webster, definition, a person sent on a religious mission, especially one sent to promote Christianity in a foreign country, right? And most people associate missionaries, that word, to Christianity, although other religions have missionaries. We're probably where we are the most mission-minded faith. And so but I like to back people up a little bit and say, look, let me remind you this: a missionary is simply someone who says yes, right? When they hear God speak, when they see God at work, if we go back to the principles of experiencing God, they say yes. And so, so then when we get, let's even back up a little further. A missionary really is someone, I mean, they're just part of the family of God, right? They're members of the body of Christ who seek the Lord and desire to see his will done on earth, and they respond when they hear God's call. Right? I mean, when we
Yeah.
look through the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, Abraham, Moses, and David, all heroes of the Old Testament, were people who said yes when God gave them a command. Right? I mean, and some of them it was audible voice. I mean, a burning bush always helps, um, David, began with, like, being anointed, king, but it also started with just his faith, right? We see him out in the field. I mean, the lion comes and he just doesn't back down. In faith, he protects his flock, right? The bear comes, and so then he's anointed king, and then he faces Goliath. At that point, I'd have to go back and read again. I still don't think we've heard that, like, David has heard the audible voice of God, right? But he's responding to a life of faith and belief in God. We get to the old, and let me point this out. All of them I just named, terribly flawed people like the rest of us, right? Nothing special. I mean, among that list, right? There's murder, adultery, right? Lying, doing some things to, try to make the will of God happen on their own. In the case of Moses, which, so, I mean, and Abraham, I mean, we're not talking about perfect people, but we're talking about people that responded when God said yes. When we get to the apostles, they walked with Jesus, and in that life of faith, if you study the Gospels, it wasn't the first time they'd met Jesus. He says, follow me. And they, dropped their nets immediately and went. It was in the life of relationship, getting to know Jesus and knowing him and trusting when he said, follow me, they said yes. So, it's missionary is really, to me, it's someone who just growing in their faith kept saying yes to God. And like we pointed out in the last episode, um, as they said yes to God, then he gave them a little more to say yes with. They kept saying yes until now all of a sudden they might be moving to Africa, like Tommy and Helena Morris. So, what do you think
Yeah.
about that,
Hey,
Tommy? Does that sound familiar to you, man?
it does. I mean, I want to say this first before we get too much into how we ended up to be heading to Africa next year. When I think of mission, I remember the first time I heard someone talk about doing a mission trip, and I was like, "Oh, where are you guys going?" And they said Detroit, and I was like, "But that's in the United States." Like, it didn't register in my head, right? But as I grew and understood more of what being on mission was about, I think about the Great Commission. They started right there, in Jerusalem. They started right there
Mhm.
locally, and then it expanded to reach the uttermost parts of the earth. But whenever we walk out the Great Commission, which is making disciples and baptizing them and teaching all the things that Christ had commanded and shown them, that is being a missionary. You can be on mission across the street if you are
Yep.
living out the Great Commission, and you are doing that. And I know there's one church here locally that they have a big sign inside the church, over the door as you walk out, it says you are now entering the mission field. And that's so true.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is a very good perspective of missionary work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so today we're going to ask the larger question, like, how does one become a missionary? I've already hinted at that. Some people think it's always a big message written in the sky or a handwriting on the
Right.
wall or a burning bush, we've talked a lot about experiencing God, that the great things about it, that study, but also some of the things like it leads people to kind of sometimes, all right, not everybody, because I would say this, I've heard Henry Blackaby teach, and I know this is not what he means by it, but some people still go out and look for the burning bush, right? When I see the big thing God does, I'll know that's where I'm supposed to go. But it really
Right.
starts with relationship, man, right? That's what it starts with, because in that relationship, we know that God is always at work around us, at work in our lives. John 5:17, when Jesus is questioned about healing on the Sabbath, he just basically goes right to, hey, my Father's working till now, and I'm working. He's like, hey, God's always been at work in this. And in researching that statement months ago, a while back, I thought it was pretty cool to know this. The reason Jesus is saying that is because in Genesis 2, teaches that God rested on the seventh day. But Jewish rabbis agreed that God continually upholds the universe, yet without breaking the Sabbath. So Jesus was saying, hey, you recognize God is always at work, even on the Sabbath, right? So God's always at work around us. And one thing I love too in studying Exodus 3 is that when God came to call Moses, right? So even at the burning bush, what God said was, I have come down to rescue my people. Like, I'm already here. I'm already at work. And what God was doing was inviting Moses into that work. He said, so now I am sending you to be a part of this. I'm already here to do it. Right. God had come down to do it, but inviting him to do it. So so even all of this, Moses, all these people we've talked about, started with relationship. So how do you feel about that, man? I mean, how has your relationship with God, and as it's grown, especially in recent years, led you guys to this place?
Well, I think that's the key, is that it really is about growing in your relationship with Christ. I think sometimes we look for the grand gesture, we look for the big event, because there tends to be an emotional high that kind of attaches to that, and then we kind of ride that into that commitment. But the truth is that a lot of times emotional highs can have like an emotional crash, right? Like reality hits. And if you go and you look at statistics of people who go into the mission field, and the number of people that come back, within 2 years, I
Yeah.
think that you have to look at commitment and relationship. That's the thing. Relationship is about commitment. And so I think when it starts with relationship, you're in a better place to kind of go the long haul through the commitment versus just a quick emotional high, big event going, yeah, let's do this. it's
Yeah.
it's really birth out of something that is more sustaining and something that is more long term.
Yeah. Because it's a part of a continual walk.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. Some people think, missionary work was, someone was, they were doing whatever job they were doing. All right. And all of a sudden God said, hey, move to Africa, move to whatever. And by the
Right.
way, I didn't preface this. If you've been following Plead the Cause, then Tommy and his wife have been called as missionaries to Zambia to join our team there. They've already been board approved. They're on the path to get there. And while they're in the States, he's already joined our work and helping us with Plead the Cause. But that's the ultimate goal at this point. That's the next goal, right? Getting to
Right.
Zambia.
Right.
But people would think, Tommy and Helena were just sitting around one day, running a wellness center and doing whatever. And God said, move to Zambia. And you went, oh, okay. But it's not, it's a part of a continual relationship, right?
Right.
Look, I was a worship pastor. I was in worship ministry for 20 years. Now I'm privileged to lead this organization, but that didn't happen in one day of me, planning worship. And all of a sudden I looked up and God said, no, go join Heart of the Bride. That wasn't
Right.
it, man. It was years of a journey. And so, yeah, God, that's our stories. I think all of our stories model that, that we didn't just get
Right.
here. because of that. But I do think there's one thing though that is true of every missionary, especially the ones who stick it out and who go, but everyone who goes, is that absolute surrender is a must.
Mhm.
Absolute surrender is a must.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to the question of what does it mean to call him Lord, right?
Mhm.
I mean, if you say to someone, "You are my Lord," all right, and to God, "You are my Lord," and then He says, "Well, here's what I want you to do," and you go, "Yeah, but," I mean,
Right.
He's not your Lord. That person or God is not your Lord if there's a but, right? Do this. Well, but I mean,
Right.
if Christ Jesus is your Lord, then when he says go, you go. Right. And so the thing is, we don't all get there immediately, though. I know for me, it was a
Okay.
journey too. I had a mentor early on who really taught the Lordship of Christ and taught it well. So we grew up in Christian families, and we had older examples in our families of those who had done ministries. But how did that play out for you guys? Just getting to that place of, okay, God, whatever you say, I've got to say yes to. You're my Lord.
Yeah. That really was where it started. There was a sermon preached by Pastor Pat at our church at Live Oak, where his challenge was, are you willing to say yes to the will of God when you don't know what the will of God is, or what it would require of you, what it would entail? And I'd like to say I'm all spiritual and went home and was like, yes, Lord, but no. I mean, it was something that Helena and I went and we prayed about, and we're not just flippant. We were very intentional in our prayer about that, and it really came to a place after a couple of weeks of prayer of going, yes, God, whatever you're calling us to do, we want to say yes, whatever that looks like, whatever it is. Yes. And the thing is that at this moment that we're saying this, Africa wasn't even on our radar. There was no discussion of being missionaries at all. I mean, I'll be honest, being a missionary in a foreign country was the furthest thing from my mind. I had all these ideas of this wellness center we were building and how we were going to serve our local community, and we had some ideas of what that was going to look like, and we had these ideas of starting a school. And so we had our plan. We had an idea of what we thought saying yes to the Lord was going to look like, and how that was going to play out here locally in Florida. But it did start with that. It started with just a heart of surrender, going, whatever it is, God, we surrender and we say yes.
Yeah. And I've shared this before. Maybe soon we'll reverse this podcast where we can kind of share more in detail our journeys here. But, we actually had already surrendered to the idea of being missionaries and thinking it was Kenya. Right. We love mountains. I mean, it was just so much. And the area that we get to at that point we're really ministering mostly in Kenya is just, it's like the Garden of Eden. It's beautiful. I mean, so we had that draw, but also the people, all that we love. I mean, that's where we thought we'd be serving. And then God said, no, I want you to move to Florida and join the home office. And I'm like, well, that's not that glorious. That's really not the sacrifice I thought I was going to make. That
Yeah.
seems like more of my Nineveh, right? But God, I mean, and he brought us here in a different role, but ultimately God knew that one day, I guess his ultimate plan was for me to be sitting in the role I'm in now. If we had bucked that and gone to Kenya, as glorious as that might sound, not a part of God's will and his ultimate will, things would look very different for us and maybe even for Heart of the
Yeah.
Bride now. So, yeah, you got to say yes to the one who knows everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not because he's your Lord and because he actually knows it all. So, when he suggests something or instructs in something different than you don't expect, then yeah. Well, that's cool. Well, we might have kind of talked about this one a little bit already, because the next question kind of talks about your relationship and how it leads you here. One of the things that we just studied this last week as we're going through experiencing God again is that obedience to God will require adjustments.
Mhm.
And those can be the big steps, big adjustments, but a lot of times, again, just starts with the little steps of obedience. And the statement in the study is, you can't stay where you are and go with God. Now, it's easy to get hung up on that and just think of that as physically going, right? You can't stay where you are and go with God. God's not always calling everyone to the mission field, at foreign or whatever. He's not always calling people to leave where they are, like he did Abraham or Abram at the
Right.
time. But God is always challenging us. He's always growing us. It's very clear in His Word that He wants to grow us, that He prunes us, and so all of those things take steps of obedience.
Mhm.
I mean, it's the everyday decisions to get up a little earlier and spend time with God, right? That quiet time where you're aware of His presence, praying and reading the Word, receiving from Him. It's all about just those steps of saying, of obedience. And then there can be the big ones. I loved it. We were looking at Elisha this week and his calling to the ministry when he was called to be a missionary. He was plowing a field, and so he stopped. He slaughtered his oxen, burned all of his stuff. There was no going back, right? But it
Yeah.
was that absolute surrender, but making that adjustment right there. And so, we see that as we look back over our journey, that it was little adjustments all along the way, and then some major ones. What about you guys? Like, what is what kind of adjustments have you made and are you making as you pursue your relationship with God, and in light of that, this calling?
Yeah, there were some, I mean, pretty early on, because like I said, I had my idea of what it was going to look like when we said yes and where we were going to go with our lives and what we were going to do. And I wasn't there when you spoke at our church or when the Walkers did, but after the second time when the Walker spoke, Helena asked me to pray about Africa. And so I agreed to it. And then God began to work in my heart. And as we were praying through this and what it was going to look like, the first adjustment that was made was we ended up closing the business and handing the building and
Mm,
our clients
mm,
off to another therapist. So that was the first adjustment that we had to make. This plan that I thought was what we were going to be doing and what God was leading us to went away. I mean, completely. And that was a big adjustment. That was
mm,
not easy, but God prepared us. Thankfully we received some godly counsel and just had some confirmations through prayer. And I'm very thankful to have a wife who is very strong in her faith and trusting God and what He's doing
mm,
for us. And so that was very big. But then I think some of the bigger adjustments have happened just this year, and how we've kind of positioned ourselves of having to step out in faith. There at the end of the year, my position that I held here in Florida with a company was eliminated, and so I didn't have a job, and we were praying through what was next. And so I'm applying and putting resumes out there, and I'm just not getting interviews. And then one day we're on a call, and Candace Walker is like, "Well, maybe God's calling you to do this now." And that was not on my radar really, because I was looking to go get a job with nice, secure career salary and
mm.
benefits and all of these things. I wasn't,
At least for the next year
missionary
and a
work,
half.
right? At least for the next year and a half before we went to Zambia. But we prayed. You prayed. Michael prayed. We all kind of talked about it, and then God opened the door for me to go ahead and join Heart of the Bride now. And so that has been a big step of faith. So there have been a lot of adjustments we've had to make just in our personal budget. We went in and made some very drastic cuts to cut, where there was spending or different things for our finances. It's different adjustments with our time and what we do and efforts of that nature. Uh, Definitely in our prayer life and in
Mhm.
trusting God. But as we look forward, we know there are adjustments that are going to have to be made. Right now we live right here in Northwest Florida with her mom and sister right down the road, my parents. My oldest daughter Joyce is here, and she'll be going off to college next year right here locally. So all of our family, predominant amount of families right here in our own backyard. And so that's another adjustment is we'll be going over there and they will all be staying here. And so we won't have them right there with us anymore. So there's a lot of adjustments. And one of the things that we've talked about, and when we talked with Pastor Pat and kind of shared during our commissioning service, was there's not a single sacrifice that we'll have to make or adjustment that we'll have to make um, that is greater than being obedient to the will of God.
Yeah,
Obedience to
yeah,
Christ and the benefits of that far outweigh anything that we would try to hold on to.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
yeah,
Well, and I think you already even hit the next point, which is obedience is costly. I mean, God
yeah,
asks us to give. He asks us to sacrifice. He does, and to surrender, and that is costly. We see Paul's example when he's followed when Jesus spoke to him on the road to Damascus. I mean, then in 2 Corinthians 11:23 through 33, I mean, he kind of highlights what his journey's been like, and it was not easy. I
yeah,
mean, beatings and floggings and imprisonments and shipwrecks and I mean hunger and shelterless. I mean, Paul, obedience is costly, and a lot of those adjustments cost us. And then you look at the apostles, the disciples. I mean, they walked away from jobs and businesses. The way you did, family businesses, the fishing business, right? They walked away from those things. Obedience is costly, and so we would say the same thing. Absolutely. I mean, we all have to step out in a measure of faith, and then it's costly. One of those costs is there's almost always opposition. As you
yeah,
step out in obedience, opposition from the world. Sometimes there's opposition from those you trust. Sometimes opposition from your own family, and you face challenges. I mean, the spiritual battle is
yeah.
real. What kind of you've already outlined some of the challenges you guys have had. Are there any other things that and maybe we should just wrap this into the next one is that when you step out, your faith is going to be tested. I think all this wraps together, right? Your faith is going to be tested, right? I
Yeah.
mean, because we do face opposition from there's a spiritual battle going on around us. We know, I mean, Ephesians 6 is very clear that this battle is spiritual. It has obviously manifests itself in the physical world where we live, but it is, we have an enemy. He opposes us. And so, we're going to be tested. We're going to be also face opposition from him, giving up income. We've all done it, and
Yeah.
trusted that the body of Christ will give so that we can be supported. So, what kind of challenges have you guys faced? In stepping out in faith to do this?
Yeah, early on, I mean, I'd say quickly, uh, I struggled personally with just the idea of leaving the comforts of the US. That was a personal struggle that God was working in my heart. And, it was very freeing once, I had that breakthrough in that and just really was able to fully put trust and faith in Christ, because I thought, again, I thought I had this plan, and to see all of that go away and God lead in a different direction. I struggled with kind of relinquishing my ideas and control over where I thought things were headed. So that was a first one of the first ones. But along the way, I mean, yeah, there have been people who you think we're crazy. Why would you want to
Hmm.
leave
Yep.
Florida and go to the middle of Africa? Well, it's not the middle, South Africa, but them thinking like, why would you do that? Why would you want to give up the comforts of this and go over there? Like, not that they even know what it's like over there. It's just their
Yeah.
assumptions. When you say moving to Africa, they have, their idea of what that means. And some of them have expressed concern for our safety,
Yeah.
for, our medical uh, care and stuff of that nature. But it's been an opportunity for us to just say, like, we're trusting God with that. Like, if He's called us over there, He's faithful. Bad things can happen here. Bad things can happen wherever you go. Sickness can happen wherever you go. Hardships can happen wherever you are. The fact is, no matter where it is, we are putting our faith and trust in God. We've said yes. This is what we believe He's called us to do. So we're going to step out and we're going to trust God in that. So then more recently, I would say would be with the job thing,
Yeah.
when my position was eliminated at the end of 2022, like I said, I didn't get interviews, and I've never had that happen. I mean, typically, if I'm looking for a job, I'll get multiple offers in a week. I'll typically have my choice, and I've been in the industry I was in for over 12 years, had tons of connections, and here I am, and it's just crickets. I mean, the phone is not ringing at all. And the first 30 days, it's like, yeah, fine, we're trusting God, we're great. Once we hit February, I mean, I was starting to get discouraged. I was starting to go, God, what are you doing? What are we doing? What am I crazy here? Like, I don't understand, and just not really understanding, where God was leading, what was going on in this moment. And my faith was really getting tested at that moment where I'm like, God, how are we going to eat? How are we going to pay the bills? What are we going to do? We're depleting savings. And it just that rolled into us talking about joining Heart of the Bride and going ahead and kind of being a home-based missionary and still serving abroad in a different capacity than we will when
Mhm.
we move to Zambia, but also serving missions here locally through foster and adoption care. And that became a thing of going, okay, God, we're going to trust you. Like, we know that this is going to look different. We know that financially it's going to look different with our time and just, you know, having to trust that God would provide and sustain us. And He has every step of the way. God has come through and shown Himself faithful. So multiple, areas where we've been tested, and like I said, I'm very thankful for Helena, who's very strong in the faith and has been
Mm.
very encouraging me in the times where I've been like, what are we doing? But God has always shown Himself faithful. And so as we look to the future, I know there are going to be other tests that come. Look, the first time we talked to you about the possibility of going to Africa, one of the first things you said to us was, "Be ready, your faith will be tested." Like, I mean, not the greatest sales pitch to try to get someone to become
Now,
a
my job is to
missionary,
talk you
right?
out of it at first, man. My job is to
Right.
talk you out of it. If I can talk you out of it,
Right.
you're not called, right? That's my
Right,
philosophy.
right. So, and I mean, and you weren't wrong. You were not wrong, and I know there will be more. And the beauty of that is just like Joshua and the stones, and being able to remember the times that God had been faithful, and looking to the promise that God had for them. All the times that God has been faithful, we can look back now. And so when we face the next test, we can go, "Hey, look, God came through every single time before. How can we not trust Him?"
Yeah. Praise the Lord, man. No, that is awesome. I appreciate you sharing all that today, man, and your guys stepping out in faith this year, and in a number of ways, and against unexpected challenges and tests, has been inspiring to me. I know, and to the rest of our staff, to watch someone walk in that fresh and anew is always encouraging to us, and of course, joining in prayer with you guys and watching God move is pretty awesome. So we're all excited about that. So as we wrap up today, let me go back to this. You guys, some people listening to this may hear this story and go, well, yeah, I could never be there and do that. But let me remind you this: we are all called to make adjustments in obedience to follow God. And I want to back you up to the beginning and remind you to do this, that, the first call for us is to seek the Lord, right? To know Him. And so I want to challenge you today. I like to give some step of challenge right at the end of each one of these as I can. Hey, look for where God is speaking to you today. What adjustments do you need to make to obey God right where you are? Is He calling you to a deeper level of commitment and seeking Him? Do you need to get up earlier in the morning, go to bed earlier at night, turn off the TV earlier? What is it to seek the Lord, to spend more time in His Word? Is it to stop in the middle of the day, spend time in prayer, and trusting that He'll help you complete what you've got for your to-do list that day? Now, I'm speaking from experience there. That's one of my battles, right? Is to trust God with my to-do list, to even stop in the middle of the day and seek Him. What is it God is asking you to do? Is it to tithe? Maybe you're not a tither, or maybe He's asking you to tithe more to your church, or to give some time to a ministry, or to lead something you've never thought you would be doing. Whatever it is, wherever you are in your walk, God is challenging you to the next level. Say yes, be obedient. That doesn't mean you're going to end up a missionary. Don't be scared, around the world, but it does mean God will use you in His mission here on earth. He'll use you in his kingdom, and he wants to use you in greater ways. He's given you spiritual gifts. He wants to develop those and use those for his glory. So that's my challenge to you today, is to say yes to those things. And only God knows where you'll end up. Maybe right where you are, maybe someplace different, but you'll never know till you start saying yes to God. It starts with loving the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength. And so start there today. That's my challenge to you. Tommy, thanks for sharing your story today, man.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate
Or
the
this
opportunity,
last
man.
part of it. We'll go back and get the beginning some other time. But yeah, I appreciate you sharing y'all's journey into where you are now. Um, so hey, I'll try to wrap it up today, and you can tell me how I do since you did all
All
that.
right, I'll grade you. I'll grade you.
We want to thank Michael Anderson for running all of our technology today. He's our director of development. I thank Tommy for sharing and opening up today and sharing his story. I just want to thank all of you for listening and watching this. We went a little long today, so if you stuck with us, we really appreciate that. Hey, listen, if you're watching this on YouTube, please, like it, hit the little bell icon down there to be notified of when we post a new episode. Make a comment, if you will. It helps us get the word out, helps us plead the cause for orphaned and vulnerable children around the world to even more people. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, again, subscribe and follow us, whatever platform you're on, and be with us. This is another way for us to plead the cause of the orphaned and vulnerable children around the world. So help us do that. So we thank you for paying attention, for listening, for being with us. We want to invite you to always pray, engage, and give. Join the Commit 3 initiative. You can go to heartofthebride.org/commit3 and see what that means, and join us in deeper ministry in a number of ways. A lot of opportunities to get involved. You may or may not become a missionary. That's only up to God. So take the next step and see where God leads you. How was that, Tommy?
It was great. You did great.
All right.
I might start
Yeah, I'm
letting you take
learning
that
from
over.
you. Learning from you, man. Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you again on the next Plead the Cause.